I'm Steve Coburn, Executive Director of Wharton Digital Press, and today I have with me Paul Schoemaker, who's the author of Brilliant Mistakes, Finding Success on the Far Side of Failure. Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Okay. A brilliant mistake sounds like an oxymoron. How can a mistake be brilliant?
Well, if you learn more from the mistake than it cost you, it might actually get to be brilliant. But I recognize there's a bit of a paradox in the title. So I think it is an action that you take or a prediction you make that turns out to be not right. And this hurts you initially, but it also opens up new vistas, and it may result in innovation, discovery. You're starting to see the world differently, or yourself differently. And this could be in a small way. You get fired from a job unexpectedly, and it prompts a lot of learning. Or you enter a new market or a new technology, and initially many things don't work out well. But then the benefits eventually of having made, quote, that mistake more than compensate for its cost. That would qualify as a brilliant mistake.
What are some examples? Can you give me an example of a brilliant mistake?
Sure. I think a common example is that people start, after they leave school, they start to work and they take a job, and they may think they're doing wonderfully well, and then they go to their boss and they insist on a raise. They may get fired on the spot, and as they go home to think about it, they say, boy, that was dumb. Why did I do that? But it may also be, as they start to think about it more deeply, once the emotion has subsided, they really start to think about, so why did I have such a distorted view of how people perceive me and what my added value is in that company? And this may get people onto the right path. And many, I think, successful people have had those experiences.
Can you give another example of a brilliant mistake?
Well, I think that, of course, in science, there's many, right? There's many scientists, from Fleming, who discovered penicillin, by allowing a certain amount of sloppiness in his laboratory. And because he did that, he had a wider range of observation and noticed spores coming into a dish, which then led to the discovery of, penicillin.
Well, Paul, what got you interested in brilliant mistakes in the first place? What led you to develop the ideas in your new book?
Well, first of all, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. And there's a rationalization process where you want to believe they're brilliant, but they aren't. So the topic is intriguing for anybody who reflects, I think, on their own life. But what really intrigued me is the following. If you ask successful people in business what they learned the most from, they tend to say, my mistakes, right? And then the next question that I ask is, so why not make a few more mistakes if they're so valuable? Why leave this up to chance? And they don't have a good answer to that question. And I didn't have a good answer to that question either. And now I think I'm confused at a slightly higher level about that question.
In your book, Brilliant Mistakes, you argue that managers and organizations should make more mistakes. They should make mistakes on purpose. Why do you say that?
Yes, and I have to say that, of course, with a caveat. You have to do it carefully and strategically. Well, I think that most people are risk averse, which means that they play it quite safe, and they don't explore as widely around their viewpoints, their mental models, as they perhaps should. Organizations exacerbate this because they reward people for results most of the time, not so much, good intentions or a good process for exploration. So I think leaders who want to compete on innovation, and that's an important caveat. If your intention is to change the business model, if in a new environment, I think you should have more tolerance for mistakes than is typically the case in companies.
You argue, though, that companies should not just have more tolerance for mistakes, but make them on purpose. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that is indeed a higher level of making mistakes. I think you should first start by mining the existing mistakes very well, because most of the time we run away from our mistakes. We don't want to think about it. It's an unpleasant experience. But once you start to realize that mistakes are treasures, are gifts of sorts, and then you say, now how can I create ecologies or environments where this happens more naturally, more fully? And in our own company, we did an example where we would routinely reject proposals that came in for projects that we had no connection to, were over the transom. We thought this was a waste of time to respond to those opportunities. And what we did once is list a whole bunch of assumptions that was made by this management team in that company, assumptions about how you run the business, and this was one of them, that we don't respond to requests for proposals, RFPs, that we have no connection to. And it turned out that it was an easy way to test that, whether that was a correct assumption. And when we did, to our delight, it turned out that some of these unsolicited proposals turned out to be quite profitable. But it wouldn't have started unless we started to list some of these key assumptions.
So you deliberately decided to make a mistake.
Yes.
And look at proposals that came in over the transom, which you wouldn't have previously.
And yes, and under the old frame of mind, if we had done a cost-benefit analysis or even more sophisticated stuff like a rate of return on the investment, we would have rejected it. We've said this is not a good thing to do. But just like David Ogilvy brilliantly would run advertisements that he thought would not work to test his own views about advertising. So I think you make the best decision you can, whether you're hiring people or you're launching products. But if you have been hammered by life a little bit and accumulated some wisdom about also the limits of your knowledge, then there should be a part of your brain that says, I don't have all the answers. I don't have a full understanding of the situation. So you should permit a little bit to have discovery that seems accidental, but really is maybe strategic as well.
Now, in your book, Brilliant Mistakes, you argue that there's certain sorts of mistakes that you should make, but you don't want to make mistakes that are going to bankrupt the company, that are catastrophic. How do you decide which mistakes are worth making to learn?
So after the fact, it's easier, of course. You could do a cost-benefit analysis of the many mistakes you've made in your life, and you say, were they high cost, were they high benefit, low cost, low benefit, and that gives you right there 4 different combinations. So you don't want to make more of the high-cost mistakes in a personal situation, driving your car into a tree and ending up in a wheelchair. You don't learn enough from that to justify it. There's also mistakes that are very high cost, having a divorce or indeed bankrupting a company, but the lessons can also be enormous, can be transformational, etc. And I think ahead of time it's sometimes hard to make that determination. So I think you have to look at the conditions that favor these brilliant kind of mistakes. And I think those conditions are if you have a lot of uncertainty in the problem, the world has changed on you, so probably your old ways of thinking are not quite the right ones, then you have to create more space to discover new approaches. And if you don't do it, others will.
Yeah. How do you turn a mistake into success? How do you turn failure into success?
Well, some people sort of would say that once you have made a decision, the die is cast, and now the consequences you don't control, and it was a bad decision or a good decision, but it's determined at the moment of choice. But I think most managers realize that there's so much uncertainty that the first decision is just that, the first decision. And you have many opportunities, whether you hire people or you launch a new product, to make midstream adjustments. So these after the decision interventions that happen can turn what seemed to be initially not a good decision into a better one just by intervening. And the learnings that come from it, apart from the immediate benefits, the longer term learnings can also be of such a magnitude that it dwarfs the original cost.
What surprised you the most in writing the book?
Well, as I thought about it, first of all, that it is a complex subject, that it is a controversial subject. Very few people want to say they favor mistakes. I was also struck, however, that many very successful people have not only a tolerant approach to mistakes in music or in sports, but they actually embrace them to some extent. They have an intuitive sense that these mistakes are, as Joyce put it, they are portals of discovery. These are new venues, new avenues for having, insights that otherwise you wouldn't get. And that's the key. The mistake is an expensive way to get to new insight. But if that is the only way to get to that insight, it may still be worth, pursuing. So that was one that very successful people practice this. The other thing that intrigued me was that there's actually a rational basis you can actually build a case for making mistakes, either through portfolio theory, that you put in things that go against conventional wisdom, or sort of an options perspective, that you're buying options on future learning. It is a difficult subject. I certainly don't have the last word on this. I feel I'm scratching the surface. But I think in this time where many companies have made great mistakes because of the global recession and the financial crises, I think this is a time that really we should try to say, so what have we learned from this? This is a gift for many companies. How robust is their business model? What should they do differently? And so I think maybe the book was a mistake, but we have to wait 10 years to see if enough learnings come out of it. But I think it surprised me how deep and wide the subject really is.
What is your most brilliant mistake?
Well, we all make them, and it's hard to reflect on them. Personally, I think I made a mistake, you would say, from an academic. I was an academic for many years, and I decided to take a rather long sabbatical outside of academia when my career was going quite well, just having been promoted to associate professor. And a lot of my colleagues said, this is not smart. You have a nice momentum going, keep doing research and do it at a later point. And I went against that conventional wisdom, and there were clearly some costs, for 2 years fewer publications, but there were also great benefits resulting in a change in career, a change in setting up a company, etc. So I would say that the benefits did outweigh those costs.
So you learned from the mistake to your benefit.
I think I did, and I would recommend it to others as well.
Yeah. Why is it so hard for most of us to learn from our mistakes? What are the problems we run into?
I think that people don't enjoy thinking about them. There's a visceral reaction to mistakes. You know, we use expressions like eating your words and being sick to your stomach when something wrong happens. So we're willing to learn from surprise if it is a positive surprise. If something good happens to us, we happily talk about it with others and we dwell on it. Mistakes we want to suppress, also in organizations. And the challenge there for leaders in companies is to create cultures where people actually get the benefit of the tuition that the company already has paid, namely the mistake.
What do you think is the most important thing that readers will get out of your book, Brilliant Mistakes?
Well, number one, I think that it will change their view about what a mistake is and the value of it. Secondly, I think they will see lots of examples where in business this has been used to advantage by rather gifted leaders. And thirdly, they will get a roadmap of what mistakes to make, because there's many dumb mistakes you can make. So you have to be clever about the mistakes you decide to invite into your life and be careful.
So, Paul Schoemaker, author of Brilliant Mistakes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, for having me.